This program is made possible by the loyal financial support of the friends and partners of Family Policy Institute.
You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world.
Good evening and welcome to Salt and Light. Thank you for joining us. It's my great privilege to introduce Jackie de Lange back to the Salt and Light studio. Jackie, it's so great to have you on the set again.
Well, Errol, it feels like I'm home being here, and it has been a while since I've been in studio. And of course, as you mentioned with my surname, I am married now, but still championing the cause and promoting the magazine and of course your ministry, because it's just so vital.
Absolutely, and we're so grateful to you, Jackie. I remember when we started our television programs in 2012, you started with us.
Yes.
And you were the co-anchor with me, and you did the news segments and all kinds of wonderful things. So we're really grateful to you for the huge role you played in getting our television programs off the ground. And now you've been married, you're traveling all over the world with Joy Travel, you're busy with Joy Magazine, Jeugd Magazine, you're doing so many things besides being a wife.
Yes, that's been learning and adjustment.
But you're managing and you're doing a
wonderful.
Great job. We follow you, thank God for Facebook, we follow you, all your exploits, the wonderful Giorgio de Lange, what's Gillian, your sister?
Oh, Gillian, Fraser.
Holiday. It was so
Yes.
good to see the family come together and go on a family holiday.
It was our first family holiday in 10 years.
I know.
Because we all work, we're all entrepreneurs, so we don't really switch off. And similar to you and Arlene, every
Yes.
time we go overseas, it normally has a purpose.
Yeah.
But it was wonderful to have a holiday and to combine it with the travels and the tours that we do with Joy.
Exactly.
So.
You work so hard. Your mom does too, and your sister, and everybody in this clan. And so to see the family come together and enjoy this cruise. I followed you guys and we said, oh, this is so good. You guys deserve it so much, especially what happened with the hacking and all those kind of things.
Yes.
So.
Well, Errol, I mean, that hacking story went viral across South Africa because we decided to open it up publicly and tell people about how the magazine servers were hacked, because we want to prevent it happening to other ministries
Yes.
and other
Yes.
Christian entities and churches as well. And so we've done a big article in the magazine because, especially for individuals at home who have no IT support or infrastructure, if a hacker controls your database and your photos and all that, it can devastate you. Because with one lady who contacted us, she had lost her son and she only had one child who had now passed away, and this hacker took all those photos and memories and held them to ransom.
And it's really diabolical.
Yeah, so we believe that the Lord allowed us to go through that with all of our magazines and our servers and our travel business, even though we've got huge firewalls, because we can actually educate the public and Christian ministries of how to prevent it in the future.
Absolutely. And Joy Magazine is a blessing. Jeugd Magazine is a blessing. And I want to ask people out there, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to Joy Magazine, to Jeugd Magazine, because this magazine plays such an important role in society, and critical for Christians at biblical worldview and keeping people up to date on news, critical news that's happening in our country and around the world and impacts you and your family. So subscribe to Joy Magazine. I'm not doing that because Jackie's here, it's because I love Joy Magazine. We partners with this work for many, many years, and I see the value of that. The enemy does too. That's why this attack came, because Joy Magazine is going in places that they don't want you to go. You're in all the retail stores, you're getting in places that people that don't hear the gospel are picking up a magazine and hearing about Jesus Christ. So we want to thank you and your mom, Erin, Giorgio, and your dad, Tony, and Gillian, your husband, Javi, everybody in the Joy team. Thank you for all the great work you're doing. And of course, the Joy Travel.
Yes.
My wife and I had the privilege of going with you to Israel, and what an amazing experience. We've never forgotten that. And we want to go again.
Yes,
So
well, I'm trying to convince you to go to Turkey now, Errol, because most Christians don't realize that the majority of the New Testament was actually based in and out of Turkey.
that's right. Antioch. It's in
And
Turkey.
yes,
in Old
but
Turkey.
also all the 7 churches of Revelation are in Turkey. Peter ministered in Turkey. Paul ministered in Turkey. Timothy ministered in Turkey. So hopefully I can convince you and Arlene to take a tour there.
We trust the Lord that we'll be able to do this trip with you.
Yes.
But Jackie, we're going to be talking about something really critical happening in our nation right now. And I'm thankful that you're here to help me with this. But we're talking about comprehensive sexuality education. What happened a few weeks ago in South Africa, a front page Sunday Times article about sex education in our public schools talked about children as young as 5 and 6 being taught about masturbation, being taught about LGBTQI, being taught about abortion. And obviously when people read this, there was a huge outcry. And people started contacting me. But it was 2 days before my wife and I left for New York. We attended a major pro-family event that I spoke at the United Nations to celebrate the International Day of Families. So I wasn't able to engage with all these people, but I sent some of them some information saying, you know what, this is all contained in comprehensive sexuality education. Family Policy Institute devised a petition against this thing. It sends a letter to the Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga, to withdraw CSE from our public schools because of the harm and the danger of this thing. What it is it's sexual indoctrination. It is not sex education in the traditional sense of the word. It is out and out, blatant sexual indoctrination, teaching children that it is your right to sexual pleasure. It is your right to have an abortion at whatever age. It is your right to whatever you feel, you go ahead and you do it. And your parents have no right to interfere in your human rights. So it is intentionally driving a wedge between children and their parents. So this agenda that comes from the United Nations, it's driven by a UN agency called UNESCO. It's driven into our schools and it says, well, it's there to help educate children with sex education so that we can bring down the teen pregnancies and we can bring down the STDs and the HIV infections.
Yes.
And of course it does no such thing. It is pouring fuel on the fire. So when I was in New York 2 weeks ago and at the United Nations, I met up with Sharon Slater from Family Watch International and a lot of the people from the UN Family Rights Caucus that are fighting for family values at that global body. And they gave me this. It's called Re-examining the Evidence for Comprehensive Sexual Education in Schools. They've done a study of 103 schools in the US and internationally, including South Africa, sub-Saharan South Africa. And the results are shocking. It really is, because this is what it says. Out of 103 school-based CSE studies worldwide, 60 in the US and 43 internationally, only 6 found evidence of effectiveness, improvement on key protective outcomes, abstinence, condom use, pregnancy or STDs, 12 months after the program for the intended population without any negative effects. So only 6 out of 103. Only one of the 6 studies was by an independent evaluator, not the program's developer, and the results have not been replicated. What this means is there's more failure rate with CSE than there is. It's doing more bad than good. So more children are experimenting with sex as a result of this, not reducing the numbers that they claim to say they do.
So Errol, I think, as you've mentioned, it's critical that we address this issue, and for the viewers at home that, again, you familiarize yourself with what's actually going on in our government, in our schools, and our education system, because you've actually been speaking about this for several years.
I have.
This is not a new program. If anything, under the radar, it's been developing, it's been adjusting the content and the nature and the scope of the agenda that it's furthering. So why has it suddenly become a big issue?
Well, because of that article in the Sunday Times. So a lot of people read the Sunday Times. But when I came back from the US in 2015 already, and I participated in this global documentary that was produced by Family Watch International on comprehensive sexuality education. They brought in experts from all over the US and the world to talk about what this thing is. And when I saw that, and I spoke as well representing South Africa, I was shocked at the level of and depth of depravity. And they're targeting young children. I was shocked. I couldn't believe this was real. And Sharon Slater, Family Watch International, and the UN Family Rights Caucus people showed me. I got tons of information. I came back and immediately I started working on this thing, putting the documentary on TV, speaking to pastors about it. The church needs to rise up and stand together to stop this thing, because children, vulnerable children, their innocence is being attacked and perverted by this diabolical indoctrination that comes from the UN. It's got nothing to do with South Africa. It's got nothing to do with the parents here or even our ideas and philosophy of sex education. It's been imported from an outside nation and imposed in our schools on our children. That's why it is so dangerous. That's why it's so diabolical. So I launched the petition, Family Policy Institute petition, with a letter going to our ministers saying remove CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education, because of the following reasons. So it's all listed in the petition. And now, until that article in the Sunday Times, there was 8,000 signatures in the petition. Now there's 53,000.
Well,
so
that's
it's
good.
shot, yeah, it is good. But it shot up dramatically after people saw this. So the interest now has been piqued. So I'm thankful, even though I've been struggling to get this information, people are like, ho-hum. Now an article in the Sunday Times has kind of triggered something. I'm grateful for that, and I want to ask our viewers, please go to familypolicyinstitute.com right now and go to the petition, click on it, sign it. It sends a letter to the Minister of Education. Read what it says, because it explains what CSE is and why we must stand together to get it removed from our schooling system in South Africa. You and I need to stand together. Every parent, every grandparent, every pastor needs to know about this and need to talk about it. So Jackie and I will be back after the break. We'll be talking more about this. And in the second half of the program, please don't go away. We're going to show you the documentary, The War on Children, Comprehensive Sexuality Education. You need to see this. Get other parents to watch this program. There's a link on Family Policy Institute website. You can watch it online as well, but you need to see that so that you are informed about the agenda of the enemy that is coming and is already in our country against your children. Don't go away. More after the break. Welcome back to the program. My guest in the studio and former co-anchor, Jackie de Lange. So good to have you back, Jackie. We're so excited that you can't see this, but the crew, the camera people, they're all jumping about and singing because they're so happy to see Jackie back.
Oh, Errol, I was trying to think when last I was here, but I know you guys have kindly come out to our Joy offices to do interviews.
Yes.
Because in between all the travels, we're not here. But Errol, it was so important for me to be here today because the issue that we're addressing in the show about the comprehensive sexuality education program that's in our schools has really come to the forefront with the media getting on board. But a lot of people at home are maybe not so clear on the program and what it actually entails. So if you don't mind, Errol, I'd like to ask a few questions that I think most of us sitting at home probably are wondering. The first thing that I think jumps to mind is the United Nations, and particularly UNESCO, is behind promoting this program and obviously having it implemented into schools. But what does UNESCO and the United Nations have to do with the South African Education Department?
Okay, so UNESCO is an agency of the United Nations, and it works on education, cultural issues like that. So that's United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization. That's what UNESCO is. And CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education, doesn't actually come from the UN. although a UN agency is pushing it all over the world, it comes from the International Planned Parenthood Association.
Okay.
So Planned Parenthood is the largest abortion provider in the United States of America. If you remember a few years ago, I think it was, during the Obama times, they were selling body parts of children that were aborted. So it's really a wicked, evil organization, this. And they devised this depraved, you can't even call it sex education, it's indoctrination. The hand of the LGBTIQI, and I don't know how many other letters, is involved in this as well, and radical feminist groups. And the whole thing is to make acceptable to children all over the world sexual rights. It's not based on sexual health, very important distinction here. It's based on sexual rights. It is your right as a child to have any kind of sexual pleasure you feel is appropriate, and your parents should not be involved in this. In fact, there's a move at the UN to pass legislation in countries where children will have the legal right to make sexual choices independently of their parents from 10 years old. So if a 10-year-old girl wants to sleep with a 40-year-old man, and if that's what she wants to do, the parents have no right to interfere in her because it's her right to sexual pleasure. UNESCO's supported a video that is online at the moment now that talks about children as young as 4 having the right to sexual pleasure. It even goes further than that. Babies having a right to sexual pleasure. It is their right. Now, as mind-boggling and diabolical as this sounds, it is fact. It is actually happening. And they're pushing this agenda. The sad thing, Jackie, is that South Africa is the only African nation to sign on to comprehensive sexuality education at the United Nations. That's why they are bound now to implement this in our schooling system, because this is not African. It doesn't come from us. It doesn't come from the people of South Africa. It comes from the UN, from International Planned Parenthood Federation, and South Africa is working hand in glove with them to push this thing on our children. The only people that can stop it, only people, are the parents out there, the Christian parents, the pastors, the grandparents that will stand up and say, no, it's not going to happen on our watch. We cannot allow this to happen to our children or anybody else's children, because God has placed us here for a time such as this, to stop this kind of evil and depravity coming into our country, into our schooling system, to attack our children, undermine parental rights, to undermine the authority and the primacy of the family, and just about everything. We've got to stop this.
Now, Errol, I think for the average person at home, we are fired up and we see the cause, but so often it feels like your voice is not heard. You can send letters of petition and nothing changes. I know there have been instances in the past where Christians have signed petitions. I think particularly back to in 2010 when you mobilized the public to stand up against the legalization of prostitution.
Yes.
For the World Cup, and that actually succeeded. So for those at home, I want to re-emphasize that signing this petition, getting on board with your community leaders and really petitioning your political leaders will make a difference.
Yes,
because if there's enough volume and enough voices coming from the masses, they will be forced to listen to their constituents and to make a change.
Absolutely. One of the things I'm going to do is contact all the senior denominational leaders in South Africa, and we're going to write a letter to our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, and to the Minister of Basic Education, Angie Motshekga. And there we're going to explain what comprehensive sexuality is, what we know and understand it to be, what this report says.
Yes.
From top people in the world that examined it and found that it is a failure. And they recommend that no country implement this in their schools because it's doing more harm than good. So we're going to write this letter. But the petition that we have going at the moment now, this is a good tool because it sends a letter. Every time somebody signs, it sends a letter to the minister, and it helps her understand how many people are against this thing. You see, if you're silent, they don't know. They'll think you're fine with it.
Yeah.
So you got to speak. And even the Bible commands us to speak for those who cannot speak. And there's a lot of vulnerable children that need you to speak at this moment. So sign the petition. It's on our website at the moment. They can go to our website, sign it, it sends the letter. And we want to keep that pressure up on the Minister of Basic Education. And along with that, alongside that, the leaders have to send this letter to the President, appealing to him to remove it. And we're going to give a good reason why. It's not just because we don't like it.
Yeah, there's been research and there's been studies that have shown.
Plenty. In fact, Jackie, this was developed to sexualize children. That is the agenda.
Yeah,
now.
that's the true reason.
It's to sexualize young children, to awaken them to this, I have sexual rights, I have a right to sexual pleasure. So when a young man comes and proposition me, or an older man comes and proposition me, it's my right to sexual pleasure. I shouldn't go consult with my parents. They've got nothing to do with this. I can have the sexual pleasure even if I'm 10 years old. This is what this is. And it is proven. All the claims they make is false. It is false. Abstinence education works. And there's reports in this that show that, proves that abstinence, it helps children understand what is happening. We have the highest teen pregnancy rates in the world. In the world. We're off the charts. People don't know what to do. The medical fraternity don't know what to do anymore. It is skyrocketing. And a lot of the young girls are getting pregnant in the schools by the teachers. And our government is not dealing with that as well. So there's a lot happening that the church has to be aware of. What is happening in our country, because God has placed his church here for this kind of thing, to expose lies, deception, darkness, wickedness, and especially against vulnerable children. Jesus made a warning about misleading and mistreating children, right? Yeah. And we are the people that need to speak about that. So I just quickly, Jackie, want to read what the recommendations have been made by this study. And they say, given the threat posed by STDs and HIV and pregnancy to the health of young people worldwide, and the compelling lack of evidence of effectiveness for school-based comprehensive sex education, after nearly 30 years and 103 credible studies, we recommend that policymakers abandon plans for its global dissemination and pursue alternative prevention paradigms for reducing the negative consequences of adolescent sexual activity. So they recommend strongly against comprehensive sexuality education. They said, look for anything else. Abstinence education, value-based education, but don't use this thing because 103 studies worldwide have shown it does more harm than good.
Well, Jesus himself, the word of God says that my people perish for lack of knowledge. Yes. How much more the unsaved who have no moral compass when it comes to these things. And, you know, although one might say at home, okay, well, my child can stay home that day or opt out, there is a certain stigma attached to the children who don't participate. So yes, that's not a viable solution, really. The solution is for us as Christians and parents to actually get involved in our children's education.
We've got to stop this thing. We've got to get it out of our schools and replace it with something that actually works. That's the solution. And if every Christian stands up in this country, we can get this done. There's millions of Christians in South Africa. We're just silent and apathetic, and we cannot be about this issue. So again, an urgent call for you to go to familypolicyinstitute.com, go to the petition. It says Stop CSE. Sign the petition, get your friends, colleagues, church members, get them to sign it to get the letter off to the Minister of Basic Education. And next up, we're going to show you the documentary. Please, you've got to watch this. You can go to our website and get a link to watch this online as well, but you've got to watch it. Every parent, every grandparent, every pastor in this country needs to watch this War on Children documentary so you understand the diabolical threat against the innocence and the health and well-being of our children in South Africa. Watch this.
In this film, the term Comprehensive Sexuality Education, or CSE, does not refer to sex education programs in general, but rather to a specific form of graphic sexuality education. CSE is designed to change the sexual and gender norms of society, promotes high-risk sexual behaviors, and encourages even the youngest of children to experiment sexually. For the protection of the viewer, Explicit images from CSE texts that will be shown have been blurred out. However, the subject matter is still not appropriate for children.
This is definitely an attack on healthy family life. It will affect your economy. It will affect your child rearing. It will affect your education system.
This has horrified a lot of people in South Africa. And the tool that is being used, the weapons that are being used, is comprehensive sexuality education.
As president of the American College of Pediatricians, I am deeply concerned about comprehensive sexuality education for 4 reasons. First, it sexualizes children. Second, it threatens children's health. Third, it promotes a dangerous gender ideology. And fourth, it undermines the parent-child relationship, which violates parental rights.
My life's work has been to protect children by exposing the roots of the sexual revolution, the sexual rights movement that's led to sex education worldwide, globally.
Say not to CSC!
Say not to CSC!
Say not to CSC!
There is a worldwide war raging across the globe. Not a war of guns and weapons, but a war of ideas, ideologies, and worldviews regarding sex.
This is just part of the lesson plan for what's called Making a Difference curriculum, and it is in Oregon schools and probably schools around the nation. This is instructions for the teacher in the classroom to ask her or his students, how do people express their sexual feelings? What is abstinence? And here are some answers that they try to elicit from the children. Oral sex, masturbation, anal sex, massage, holding hands, touching each other's genitals, saying, I like you. And what they're doing is equating all these things. Saying, I like you is equal to anal sex.
Planned Parenthood is coming into classrooms of students who are 13 and 14 years old. They're giving them handouts, negotiating sexual encounters with other students. For example, there are statements like this: do you want to go back to my room? Do you want to get busy? Can I take your shirt off? It makes me hot when you touch me. Here, can you do that? Is it okay if I take my pants off? This is outrageous. This should not be taught in the classroom.
We are state legislators from Minnesota, and we are pushing hard against the agenda to sexualize our children.
Minnesota is on the leading edge of this radical agenda, and we're trying our best to fight against it.
They're pushing a comprehensive sexual education agenda, including the book, It's Perfectly Normal.
It is pornography. It is something that even some of my colleagues, men especially on the House floor, did not want to look at. Showing children as young as 4th grade, in fact, it's recommended for 4th graders as their comprehensive sex education. We couldn't show this on the television news, but yet we want our 4th grade children to be looking at this book.
When a child looks at a pornographic image within 0.3 of a second, that's imprinted on his brain and her brain permanently. We know that there's an action that takes place which is called mirroring images, so that children will want to or will act out what they see. In the name of sexuality education, children are seeing obscene materials that have been ruled by Congress and by the Supreme Court impossible to show to children.
Where we in Latin America, we still have a lot of poverty. We have communities that don't have fresh water, that don't have electricity, children that cannot finish even primary school. Focus is completely shifted from basic needs to this very idealized agenda. They get comprehensive sexual education without the consent of parents, taking and deconstructing the family.
They have really concerning campaigns for children. The strongest one is we demand sexual education, impossible to live without it. One of them is called Put It On. They have elementary students as young as 9 years old. Then they teach them how to wear a condom. And they have this plastic genitalia, and they even have young girls. They're teaching them how to put a condom on a male genitalia and boys how to put a condom on a woman's genitalia without the knowledge and consent of the parents.
Most people are unaware that International Planned Parenthood Federation, also known as IPPF, is one of the largest providers of graphic, comprehensive sexuality education programs. With 65,000 service points in over 170 countries, this should concern governments and parents everywhere.
My brother Luigi and I had an opportunity to go to the United Nations and give a speech on the UN floor. First, my brother explained about how we became orphans when both of our parents died of AIDS. I told them how Planned Parenthood was passing out a booklet for HIV-positive youth at the United Nations called Healthy, Happy, and Hot. This is for the kids who have AIDS. The booklet says its purpose, and I quote, "To support your sexual pleasure." It tells youth they can have sex in different ways. It teaches about sexual pleasure through masturbation, with same-sex partners, and even if you are drunk.
One of the most disturbing things I think that I've ever seen as a physician, this pamphlet called Healthy, Happy, and Hot, put out by International Planned Parenthood Federation, tells young people, and you have the right not to disclose your HIV status to a sexual partner if you're not comfortable.
I was just so offended at the booklet that Planned Parenthood put out, inviting people living with HIV to engage in the very acts that would harm them.
It's all about rights instead of health. It also tells young people that are HIV positive that if they decide with their partner not to wear a condom, that's their decision. It's just this kind of information. It's so unbelievable to me as a physician.
This kind of message was a death sentence to not only both of my parents, but also my brother Rogerio.
I couldn't understand how a pro-abortion or abortion service provider in the United States of America was in South Africa and promoting the homosexual lifestyle. Here we're trying to protect young people from getting HIV/AIDS, and we're promoting a lifestyle that is very high risk.
In Guatemala, an affiliate of Planned Parenthood is huge. They have more than 2,600 service points, 27 permanent clinics, and 5 mobile units.
Planned Parenthood became very active in the 90s in Russia after the collapse of Soviet Union. They would provide textbooks for the Russian Ministry of Education and penetrate the official educational networks. Some of those textbooks were really bad and tried really to sexualize children.
The Swedish Planned Parenthood presented a film of about 30 minutes, an animated film which is addressed to young people of 13 to 14 years old. It is called Sex on the Map. In this film, the young people are taught that anything is okay as long as you agree and it feels right for you.
International Planned Parenthood Federation, especially in the Latin American region, is omnipresent. Be it at the mission at the United Nations, the person, for example, working on the actual language, drafting the document, is a direct International Planned Parenthood affiliate. We see the same thing in the Mexican government. They're usually the #1 advisor to the mission. They have a direct influence on the outcome documents, on what is established, what is negotiated at the UN.
Planned Parenthood is one of the largest organizations in the world pushing sexual health and reproductive rights. What they mean by that is not so much about reproducing. It's not about health care for babies, for mothers who want to have babies. It's trying to prevent the birth of babies.
Many of the key players that are advisors to the representatives of various countries, they're actually directly linked to International Planned Parenthood Federation. It's really striking how International Planned Parenthood Federation plays such a big role, and what we just can't put our finger on is how that happened.
Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood Federation, she was part of the eugenics movement that she referred to black people as the weeds of society. She believed in this ideology that the weak people in society should be weeded out.
They masquerade themselves as an agency here to help Africa plan its population. What they're trying to do is to suppress the African population.
They do it through education, making sure that whatever reproductive health care is wanted is in the direction of not having children.
The It's All One curriculum, also promoted by International Planned Parenthood, reveals the multiple manipulative tactics used to indoctrinate and sexualize children through CSE. Like other CSE programs, It's All One claims, among other things, to be evidence-based, comprehensive, human rights, gender-sensitive, and culturally appropriate education that will increase young people's responsible decision-making, to reduce adolescent rates of pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections, including HIV. It's All One, however, like most CSE programs, is really just cleverly disguised abortion rights sexual pleasure education masquerading as human rights, gender, and sexual and reproductive health education. It indoctrinates youth in radical feminist ideologies regarding power, privilege, and equality. It aggressively promotes abortion with 112 references to abortion, manipulating young minds using scare tactics, telling girls, every minute of every hour a pregnant girl is dying, so we need to legalize abortion. Students are then required to read stories of girls who have had abortions so they can learn to walk in her shoes in the decision to have an abortion. Like other CSE programs, It's All One has an obsessive focus on sexual pleasure, mentioning sexual pleasure 62 times. It promotes multiple sex acts, the idea that one sexual practice is not better or worse than another, and instructs children on how to stimulate themselves or their partner to orgasm. Children are also asked to read personal stories about feeling sexually attracted to someone of the same sex. It also helps students identify the skills they need to be able to negotiate comfortable sexual relationships, and claims there is no right age to have sex, and that each person has to determine when he or she feels ready to have sex. To explore their readiness, children fill out a worksheet that infers children are ready to have sex when they are feeling close to the other person, when both of you want to have sex, when you are feeling sexually attracted to the other person, and when you're feeling comfortable about telling the other person what feels good sexually. It teaches that human rights encompass sexual rights, including alleged rights to all persons to sexual expression and the right to seek sexual pleasure. Students are also given a list of problems they can work on or advocate for, such as adolescents don't have access to sexual and reproductive health services, and where abortion is illegal, it is dangerous. It's All One curriculum has been in high demand since it was launched several years ago at the United Nations, with requests coming from more than 150 countries and from every state in the United States. This program has been taught to children across the world. It can be difficult to understand why any organization would promote promiscuity and high-risk sexual behaviors to children through comprehensive sexuality education. However, hooking children on sex is a multi-billion-dollar business for Planned Parenthood and other similar organizations. This is because children, or prospects, once sexualized, become Planned Parenthood customers, dependent upon their services, and then are turned into peer advocates or educators, recruiting other young people as peer educators to generate even more customers for Planned Parenthood. Some of the lucrative, youth-friendly services Planned Parenthood and their partners provide include sexual and reproductive health counseling, contraceptive counseling, including emergency contraception, abortion services, sexually transmitted infections, including HIV prevention, treatment, and counseling, and now they even provide transgender hormone services. Planned Parenthood aggressively and quite successfully lobbies governments and the United Nations for millions of dollars annually to fund their multiple services and programs, including CSE. Some of their top executives receive high six-figure salaries, yet most governments are completely unaware of their true sexual agenda.
Just looking into the next years in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals that determines the agenda for the next 15 years, the voice is very, very biased. It's just International Planned Parenthood Federation and their affiliates who actually make the suggestions.
The United Nations is also aggressively pushing CSE for children worldwide. A prime example of this is the International Guidelines on Sexuality Education, published by UNESCO in cooperation with UNFPA. Some of the objectives of the UNESCO Sexuality Education Guidelines include teaching children, among other things, at age 5, that masturbation is not harmful, at age 9, about sexual stimulation and the definition and function of orgasm, at age 12, about respect for different sexual orientations and gender identities, and at age 15, that both men and women can receive sexual pleasure with a partner of the same or opposite sex.
When I got to the UN behind closed doors, I was really shocked. Comprehensive sexuality education, which was being pushed at us, really meant encouraging children to experiment sexually.
The comprehensive sexuality education is presented as a silver bullet that would solve all the problems. It's seen as the index to economic growth, as a solution to poverty, as a solution to everything.
Even more disturbing are the World Health Organization standards for sexuality education in Europe. These standards actually suggest that children ages 0 to 4 should be given information about enjoyment and pleasure when touching one's body parts or masturbation, and given the right to explore their gender identities. For ages 4 to 6, children should be taught about same-sex relationships and respect for different norms regarding sexuality. For ages 9 to 12, the differences between gender identity and biological sex, and about their sexual rights as defined by International Planned Parenthood Federation. And finally, for ages 15 and up, children should learn to celebrate sexual differences, about violations of their sexual rights, and their alleged right to abortion. The UN's children's agency, UNICEF, also promotes comprehensive sexuality education, and as far back as 1999, UNICEF was also found to be promoting the sexual pleasure agenda. For example, on page 89 of a UNICEF-published Sexual and Reproductive Health Manual for Pregnant Teens in Mexico, UNICEF listed situations in which one can obtain sexual pleasure that included sexual responses directed towards inanimate objects, animals, minors, and non-consenting persons.
The way they're doing this is to actually penetrate our schools. And so once it changes at the policy level, then we'll probably have no control over what is taught in the schools and who teaches it.
An online CSE program for African youth called The World Starts With Me tells children that sexuality includes French kissing, oral sex, and masturbation. It then tells them it's their own choice if they want to lose their virginity. It shows children pictures of naked girls and boys in various stages of development, and then asks them to point out differences in their private parts. Parents likely will never know, as it is all done online away from home. This program has been found in Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Ghana, and is probably in many other African countries.
We have had several high-level visits to Jamaica and the Caribbean from Prime Minister David Cameron of the UK, from the Secretary General of the UN Ban Ki-moon, and from President Barack Obama. This is about pressuring the Caribbean to accept the sexual rights campaign.
Letters have been written, try to get the Nigerian delegation to actually yield in matters of comprehensive sexuality education.
The UN is for all countries, great and small. As such, it should not be used as a platform to advocate tendencies, ideologies, or ways of life that are at variance with its core principles and mandates.
Many times we're cornered by other delegations seeking to impose a radical sexual agenda.
We were confronted with a text that was replete with controversial issues, extremely divisive in nature.
The Nigerian government was actually told by the Western countries that if they do not give in, that they will be denied foreign aid.
Let me express serious concerns regarding UNFPA's attempt to discredit the government of Nauru and its permanent mission to the United Nations during these negotiations. UNFPA has tried to convince my country to change our positions on issues such as reproductive rights and comprehensive sexuality education. Harassing my capital or going through UNFPA's regional office in the Pacific will not change my country's position. Madam Chair, does the UNFPA think it can do this because Nauru is the smallest member states of the United Nations?
The interests of organizations like UNFPA and IPPF is to get parents out of the picture and to radicalize and sexualize children. At the UN, if parental rights is being proposed in a document, it's thrown out.
A report by the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Right to Education, issued to the UN General Assembly, claimed that children have a right to comprehensive sexuality education, aimed, among other things, at abolishing guilt feelings about eroticism, and that will teach about the importance of sexual diversity.
In comprehensive sexuality education, the approach is to celebrate sexual freedom or sexual license to celebrate experimenting from a medical perspective. When sexual freedom is the priority, then sexual health is going to suffer. You just can't have it both ways.
If a sexual education program is teaching a child or leading a child towards multiple sexual relations, early introduction to sexual intercourse, it is, by the data, a public form of sexual abuse. Out-of-wedlock births are going to skyrocket. They're going to have many more abortions. They're going to have much more STDs. The probability of depressions and anxiety directly out of matters sexual increase very significantly.
So our country had a secret visit from the U.S. Special Envoy for LGBT Rights, Mr. Randy Berry. He was accompanied by the senior LGBT coordinator for USAID, Mr. Todd Larkin, to try and see what the Jamaican climate was regarding sexual rights and how they could influence change. We were able to notify the public about this visit and to send a very clear message to the U.S. government that Jamaica will not be pressured into changing our values and our culture that protects the family.
The Center for Disease Control, in their own research, shared information that 2% of the population of the US are men who have sex with men. And of that 2%, they account for 68% of the HIV infection. And the government of the United States spends $12 billion annually just to take care of that. I actually had to say to them that Jamaica cannot afford to spend that kind of money.
One of the handouts that concerns me the most is called the Genderbread Person. They teach that gender is a spectrum, that you can choose to be whatever you want. You could be all female one day and the next day feel like you're neither female or male.
Frankly, it's confusing. It's mental molestation. We're confusing these kids as to what they are.
The greatest medical fraud in history is to tell someone that they can change gender. I lived as Laura Jensen for 8 years. I discovered that biologically it is categorically impossible to change a man into a woman. My life was completely torn apart.
We have a whole specialty in medicine called gender-specific medicine. Did you know there's male and female kidneys, male and female hearts? If there's a woman who needs a kidney transplant, she will do better with a kidney transplant from a woman, because a kidney from a male, every cell in that kidney is going to have a Y chromosome. When we prescribe medications now, is this patient male or female? Because the reaction to the medication may differ.
Leading young children down the path of puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and mutilating surgeries places them at a greater risk of developing high blood pressure, stroke, heart attacks, cancer, relationship problems, anxiety, depression, and suicide as adults.
There are laws in Oregon where children as young as 15 can get taxpayer-funded sex changes without parental consent. You can't have an aspirin at school without parental consent. However, a student could make these life-altering, permanent decisions without the parental knowledge or consent.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association reports that as many as 98% of boys who are confused about their identity will come to accept their biological sex by the time they are adults, as long as they are not encouraged in their confusion.
They're tampering with the core identity of these young people and confusing them.
This is the enemy of my children and my grandchildren. And it's digging down into the core of being male and female, of our identity as persons, of our family life, of our children.
The Minnesota State High School League created policy in sports which broke down the barriers of what gender identity actually is. They are no longer allowed to tell students you can or you cannot use a particular bathroom.
The girls in the school that would actually try sometimes to go into the bathrooms just to get away from a boy, but now that's no longer possible because these boys can follow them right in.
Comprehensive sexuality education programs are disguised under many names. They may be called comprehensive sex or sexual education, education on human sexuality, reproductive health education, information on sexual and reproductive health, family life education, teen pregnancy prevention, rape prevention, anti-bullying programs, HIV/AIDS prevention, and sometimes even abstinence or abstinence plus education. CSE programs usually falsely claim to be age-appropriate, evidence-based, healthy sexuality education that will prevent teen pregnancy, sexual abuse, STDs, and HIV.
This is to help people, young people, avoid the dangers of HIV/AIDS in South Africa. And they were telling them how they could have non-penetrative sex, oral sex, experimenting. So how is this helping people to avoid HIV/AIDS?
This pamphlet, or zine as they call it, is called Dry Humping Saves Lives. This means abstinence. So they suggest that children masturbate or masturbate in front of a mirror or in front of one another. Anal sex, oral sex, grinding, sleeping together, caressing, sexting. They suggest sexting, which would be getting your groove on, fluid-free. And again, this is abstinence to them, so they're actually encouraging sexual experience for children and calling it abstinence.
Sexual rights, sexual education movements began with Dr. Alfred C. Kinsey. He was a professor at Indiana University. His book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, purported to say that everyone in the world was engaged in massive sexual promiscuity, that it was a global pattern of sexual behavior. Kinsey claimed that the research published in his book proved that children are sexual from birth, that children could engage in sex with no downside, no problem at all. Kinsey actually had pedophiles measure with a stopwatch how many children could achieve what he called orgasms within a 24-hour period. In his book, Kinsey defines orgasm for these children as fainting, as having convulsions, as screaming, as fighting to get away from the partner, what he called the partner. Kinsey documented the sexual abuse of children. Table 34 documents the sexual abuse by pedophiles of children from 5 months of age to 13 years, 317 children in that one table alone. The so-called research then, exploitation of these children, became the philosophies behind the entire structure of modern sexual education globally. Today, comprehensive sexuality education is based on this philosophy that children are sexual from birth, created by Kinsey.
3 main organizations that promote Kinsey's harmful sexual philosophies are the Kinsey Institute, Planned Parenthood, and the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States, also known as SIECUS. In fact, Mary Calderon, the main founder of SIECUS, was the former medical director for Planned Parenthood, and a former Kinsey Institute director, Wardell Pomeroy, was also a founding board member of SIECUS. These 3 organizations are all accredited by the United Nations and use their UN status to promote Kinsey-based sexuality education to children across the world.
Say no to CSE! Say no to CSE! Say no to CSE! Say no to CSE!
We have tried to stop it. We have tried to break the consensus and ensure that comprehensive sexuality education has no place in the United Nations agreed language.
We've got to stop it. We've got to use everything at our disposal. We have to stand together to stop this attack against our children.
The material was exposed by one individual, and the entire nation got wind, and as a result of it, it had to be withdrawn.
Every well-thinking adult must be vigilant and must stand as a gatekeeper to our children's development.
Band together and find ways to stop it from entering your country.
We are trying to stop Planned Parenthood in Guatemala, and they have all this funding and this organization, but we know that if we stand together, we can do something for the family, for the children, for the future of the world.
We're in a battle. If this has not come to your state in a full way, I can tell you it's come to Minnesota, and we deal with it every single day.
As elected officials, if we can't rise and stand up and speak out on behalf of our children, our innocent children, what are we even doing? What are we even doing here?
We stopped the Kinsey sexuality education program in Croatia. I went to Croatia. I held up the Kinsey books in Parliament. I described to them the basis of the Kinsey books and held up the Children of Table 34. And the Constitutional Court banned that sex education program.
The American College of Pediatricians wants policymakers to understand this. When considering a sexuality education policy, be certain you specify that it be a sexual risk avoidance program. You must reject comprehensive sexuality education. We want to teach children to avoid all the risks, 100% of the risks, by avoiding early sexual behavior.
These people, whoever they are, who want to make the sexual only about the pleasure, are working to destroy everything we are building. We resist it, even with our lives, because that's what life is all about. It is time for parents to say, no, my family is mine. My wife is mine. I am hers. Our children are ours. They don't belong to the state. And people of different faiths can easily band together on this. I may be a devout Muslim. I understand this. I'm a devout Mormon. I understand this. I'm a devout Roman Catholic. I'm a devout evangelical. On this parental issue, we are all together.
Just understand, it's happening on our watch. If we don't do something about it, it is all of us that carry that guilt.
Men have to rise up, defend their family. On matters sexual, the fathers have got to stand up and say, you have no place talking sexuality to my children.
We must let the world know the roots of this radical, destructive Kinseyan sexuality education. That is the only way we will be able to stop the corruption, the destruction of the world's children.
Family Watch International invites good people from all around the world to join us in this worldwide battle to protect the health and innocence of children. To learn more and to sign the petition to stop comprehensive sexuality education, go to stopcsc.org. You can also help by encouraging others to watch the documentary and sign the petition as well. Together, we can and will protect the world's children.